Mayor Nenshi, why was the COC's approval of Calgary seem so significant when there was no other city in the running, and the COC always seemed highly encouraging of a Calgary bid? It felt like a rubber stamp to me.
No, it really wasn't.
Okay.
They were really taking their role very seriously in thinking about whether Canada should host another Olympics, whether they want to put their eggs in that basket. And keep in mind that the Canadian Olympic Committee is 2/3 summer sports.
He's going to turn on to this building.
Are they really coming here?
Yeah, they're coming. They're there, just around the corner.
So keep in mind that the Canadian Olympic Committee is 2/3 summer sport and 1/3 winter sports. And if we are going for a 2026 bid for the Winter Games, that has some implications on potential funding for those summer sports going forward. So it really was a very robust conversation. And I was very happy that it was a unanimous endorsement, but I didn't go in there thinking that would happen.
So is somebody from Bidco speaking to council this afternoon then, after the break on that item?
Yeah, we'll have a brief update. I mean, I've pretty much told you everything now.
Okay.
But
I guess what's council going to hear of significance regarding 2026 for the rest of today?
Really not much. What if you've been paying attention to the committee meetings? It's all been in committee already.
Okay.
So this is just a chance for council to get updated on some of that, and then we will hopefully, council will endorse one final appointment to the bid committee board of directors. That's it.
Will Scott Hutchison be here then?
Yeah, I think he'll come by.
Okay.
I think he'll do a joint presentation because they've also been at the IOC in Lausanne, and so it's a chance to hear what the IOC was saying.
Talk about the significance of the snow and ice control improvements for sidewalks.
This is actually a huge deal. And in fact, when I was reading the recommendations from the committee, I didn't myself recognize what they had agreed to. And today, in a 14-1 decision, Council agreed to massively increase the snow and ice removal in the city as it relates to pedestrians, to sidewalks and pathways. This is a really, really big amount of money, and it's a really big deal. And Council really was very unified on that, which I found a bit surprising. So Council has really said, listen, even though it's going to mean some tax increases in the fall, we think that we are underperforming on this service and we've got to do a better job. And I've been saying that now for weeks.
Wasn't the dollar figures just referring to the upcoming season?
Yeah, well, yes. And that was the really interesting part, because rather than council saying, as it often does, bring it back at budget and we'll debate it then, they actually said, we are willing to invest that money for this year and bring it back to budget in order to make it permanent or make it better. Yeah, they really did.
That's right. Was that part of the motion?
What part of the motion?
It was, I think it was number 3 in the motion,
Okay.
if I recall correctly, which is, some bureaucratic language around, as part of the One Calgary process, something, something, something. But basically, what was handed out, I don't know if you guys got copies, but what was handed out was one page of what we're going to do this year, and the second page is what we're going to ask for in budget, which was even more.
Can you explain why that would require additional money when you have the reserve stick in snow and ice control as sort of a cushion? So you shouldn't have to require more money unless the reserve is exhausted, right?
Well, remember we had a terrible winter, so the reserve is on its way to getting exhausted. Because what happens with that reserve is we put money in years where there isn't much snow and take it out in years where there is not much snow, and that's how it's supposed to work. But when council adds additional service requirements, that reserve is only $20 million total, and council just added $10 million of additional requirements in addition to clearing the streets. So that reserve would run out anyway. So technically what we did today is we backstopped the reserve and said you could have more money if you need it.
Can you talk about the concerns about the low-income transit pass in terms of the increased number of riders that are accessing it while revenue is declining on transit, and what role the province plays in this?
Calgary has the first sliding scale low-income transit pass in the country, which basically means that if you are very, very, very poor, if you are living in extreme poverty, then you can ride transit for as little as $5 a month. And what we found is that the demand for that has been through the roof. It's been much bigger than we thought it was. Part of the challenge is that we introduced that program at the exact moment that the economic downturn began, and ridership just fell off because fewer people are working downtown. And so it's difficult to isolate those two things and figure out how they are related to one another. But that said, the province came to the table. It's the only operating funding we get from the province for transit to help fund a portion of the low-income transit pass. But the demand has been so high that we've ended up subsidizing that a lot more. Now, to get technical, that word subsidy is confusing because it assumes that everyone who gets a $5 a month transit pass would otherwise have been paying for a full fare pass. I actually don't think that's true. I think these are net new riders to the system by and large, or people who may have had no choice but to evade fares before. And so we need to better understand that piece. It is very clear that the province's responsibility in social services and poverty eradication, this is a good low-cost program that really helps people go to work, go to school, go to medical appointments, and assists people living in poverty. So it's something that really they ought to be investing more in.
Well, given that this is an NDP government and that it's ostensibly one of their central planks, social issues, what have you heard from the NDP government in terms of providing more funding to the city to support?
Oh, I mean, look, they've been very supportive, and they provided the initial funding that allowed us to move forward with this. And interestingly, because they always have to give the same to Calgary as to Edmonton, they gave Edmonton a similar amount of money when Edmonton wasn't even halfway down the path that we were already down. So we have to continue to make these cases. They have difficult fiscal times like everybody does, but I think this is a good priority, and frankly for them it's not a ton of money, but it does make a huge difference in people's lives. Because as I said at council, the huge demand for this program is not because people got laid off from their downtown Calgary job and now need the program. You don't go from accountants in an oil company to 50% of the poverty line in one step. These are actually people we never knew existed, people living in extreme poverty in Calgary that we had no visibility of. And it's important for us to be able to know who they are and help them in whatever way we can.
One last question, folks, and then we've got to run. Last question.
Could the program end if the province doesn't step in and provide more funding?
I mean, look, that's always a possibility. I think you saw a very strong endorsement of the program from council today. But I wanted to point out that this is one of those things you can't stand on principle on. Because if you say, well, we're not going to do it unless the province pays for the whole thing, the province isn't going to pay for the whole thing and we'll lose a very valuable program. So we've got to be able to get there in a thoughtful and rational way.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks, everybody.